Will Drew Petzing's new offense work for the Cardinals? And the Cardinals lose a running back for the season. Let's discuss.
You are Locked On Cardinals, your daily Arizona Cardinals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Cardinals, Alex Clancy here. Follow me on Twitter at Clancy's Corner. Follow the podcast at Locked On AZ Cards. Thank you for making the Locked On Cardinals your first listen each and every day, free wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Will Drew Petzing's offense work for the Cardinals? Why are there so many similarities to the Cleveland Browns team that he was the quarterback's coach for last year? What will Kyler Murray look like in the new offense? Hollywood Brown, he's auditioning this season. I'll explain, and we've got football on Friday. As we get closer to the full game breakdown on Friday's podcast, I'll give you another little taste at the end of this show. Marlon Mack's out for the year with a ruptured Achilles. Happened yesterday in practice. Guess you can bring up the turf. I don't really think that was a huge factor in this. It was a poorly thrown ball. You can find the clip everywhere on Twitter. I feel awful for Marlon Mack because, I said this when they signed him. Like, I loved him ever since he was a rookie. He had a breakout year, then tore his ACL, I believe, and then Jonathan Taylor happened in Indy. And he's been kind of a journeyman since, going to Denver and elsewhere. I feel awful for him. He was listed as, fifth string running back on the depth chart. So I don't know if he was a camp body, but he's out for the year with a ruptured Achilles. I just feel awful for the guy. I feel awful for him. He showed flashes throughout his career of brilliance. And unfortunately, we're going to have to wait another year to see what he could be like when he comes back. And the clock ticks for running backs. And I just feel awful for him. There's no easy transition into this, but that happened right before that news came out right before I recorded this podcast. Drew Petzing's offense is going to be different than Kliffy Baby's. That's for sure. What we remember from Kliff Kingsbury's offense was third and short go routes, poorly managed timeouts, a lot of dump downs, and overall, not really any cohesion from the first second to the last second of a game on the offensive side of the ball. What I said about Kliff Kingsbury was he could put together a great movie trailer, but the movie wasn't always that good. There were flashes of incredible, mind-bending, altering play calling that worked, excellently for the Cardinals, but too few, too far between, and that's why we're here where we are. But this offense is going to be massively different. And let's I want to have a discussion about Cleveland last year briefly. Okay, so Jacoby Brissett started the first 11 games. They were 4-7. And then Deshaun Watson came in and, didn't play well. He hadn't played in, a year and a half. But I just want to run down, because I looked this up, and I wasn't necessarily expecting to talk about it this way, but it was so interesting that I have to bring it up. So the Cleveland Browns last year, again, 4-7 through 12 weeks because they had their bye week in week 9 with Jacoby Brissett. Jacoby Brissett, journeyman backup, played okay in Miami, played okay in New England, played okay in Indy. He is who he is. Good locker room guy, good leader, smart guy, all those things, all the intangibles for a backup quarterback who could jump in on a whim and play a handful of games. But just like Colt McCoy, and I'm not directly comparing those two, but they've got a ceiling, otherwise they'd be starters. In their 7 losses, there were a couple blowouts, okay, but they lost to Buffalo by 8. They lost to Baltimore by 3. They lost to the Chargers by 2. They lost to Atlanta by 3. And they lost to the Jets by 1. Okay? 5 out of the 7 losses were one-score games. And this is with Jacoby Brissett, Amari Cooper, Donovan Peoples-Jones, and Nick Chubb. David Njoku had a renaissance year and he got paid this offseason, but the offense wasn't great there, especially with Jacoby Brissett at quarterback. Now, their defense is a lot better than what the Cardinals were going to be rolling out in 2023. And Drew Petzing wasn't calling the plays. Kevin Stefanski was. But he was the quarterback's coach, and he was there for the offense. So you're assuming that they're going to have some sort of fashioning of that offense here, where it's going to be run the ball, a lot of wide zone, a lot of 2 tight end sets. And, it's going to be completely different from what Kyler Murray and any other quarterback that played over the last 4 seasons under Kliff Kingsbury has experienced. And obviously the wide receivers and running backs alike. So there's a couple different ways to look at this. One, yippee. That's one way to look at it, where it's like it's any offense that's not Kliff's, good. Not necessarily. But the yippee part is if you can establish a run, any quarterback looks good or look better. It's something that if you don't have a strong run game, you're not going to win in this league. If you don't have a run game that is respected, let me put it that way. Because Kansas City's never really had an incredible rush attack. They just give the ball to their running backs a lot behind the line of scrimmage in various ways. Andy Reid is the screen pass king, but Patrick Mahomes is a wizard back there, so they get it to him in different ways. But the problem with when the Cardinals were run first-ish team with James Conner in his first year in 2021, when they started 7-0 and 10-2, was that pivoted towards relying on James Conner to do everything. If you can have a balanced rush attack with Kyler Murray and the skill position players outside of the running back room and an improved offensive line, you could be cooking with gas here. So that's the yippee. The oh no is the Cardinals running back room right now isn't great. James Conner, I've said this, he's an honorary Arizona Cardinal, quote unquote. For those that don't know what I mean by that, everydayers do, but for those that are still warming up to the everydayer status of listening to Locked On Cardinals every day, is the Cardinals have very few, quote unquote, Arizona Cardinals on this roster, drafted by, homegrown, built through, second contract, and really like the pillars of this team. DJ Humphries, Budda Baker, Kyler Murray. That's about it. Of impact. Of Jalen Thompson is probably an honorable mention. But with Zach Ertz and James Conner coming in, they've kind of become honorable mentions of being Arizona Cardinals as I define it that way. So James Conner, my biggest goal for him, because he has no guaranteed money after this season, is to turn into the closer role, where hopefully Keontae Ingram can come in this year and be a B graded running back, where James Conner doesn't have to touch the ball 70% of the time to matriculate the ball down the field. James Conner can be the LeGarrette Blount role, touching the ball 40% of the time, but 80% of that 40% is when the Cardinals are up 10 points, 12, 13 points, whatever it is in the fourth quarter, and they just need to churn clock, or you need to get a couple first downs. So with that, that's going to be the kind of where it's like, well, if you're going to run that kind of offense, you're going to need the skill position, people in place in the running back room to be able to maximize what Drew Petzing is going to implement or seems to be going to implement. So it's a very fluid situation, obviously. And it's something that it's going to be fun to see, but just like the way I think of it, just dumbing it down for myself. Picture Kyler Murray in Cleveland's offense last year. Pretty damn sweet. Imagine, look, even with Baker Mayfield when he was there, they made playoff games. They were a 4th and 1 or 4th and 3 rollout by Chase Daniel, throw to Tyreek Hill because Andy Reid was a maniac with Patrick Mahomes hurt, from potentially, going down and beating Kansas City in a playoff game. Kyler Murray is a far better quarterback than Baker Mayfield. So just picture that as a potential for what the Cardinals' future could look like. Very different, but we've been through the ringer from Bruce Arians to Todd Bowles, Mike McCoy, to Kliff Kingsbury. Drew Petzing is going to be somewhere in the middle. I like somewhere in the middle far more than one side of the spectrum or the other, especially with where the Cardinals are now in the fragile environment as they're starting to rebuild this organization. Locked On Cardinals, your team every day. Alex Clancy here. Follow me on Twitter at Clancy's Corner. Follow the podcast at Locked On AZ Cards. Hollywood Brown, Under a Microscope. Next, it's going to be fun. This episode of Locked On Cardinals is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. August is here, and you know what that means. The official start of fantasy football drafting month. Get championship ready for your home league by trying out Best Ball on Underdog Fantasy. All you do is one live snake draft, no waivers, no trades. Underdog sets your best lineup every week. Try it out with Underdog's Best Ball Mania Tournament. The largest fantasy football contest of all time is back and even bigger, with $15 million of total prizes up for grabs, including an absurd $3 million going to the winner. Last year, the winner drafted their team in July, so don't wait around. Visit UnderdogFantasy.com or find them in the App Store and sign up with promo code LOCKEDON to get your first deposit doubled up to $100. That's fantasy football. That's Underdog Fantasy. Promo code LOCKEDON. Again, the Best Ball Mania Tournament, the largest fantasy football contest of all time. $3 million going to the winner. UnderdogFantasy.com or find them in the App Store. Sign up with promo code LOCKEDON to get your first deposit doubled up to $100. That's Underdog Fantasy. Promo code LOCKEDON. Alex Clancy here, Locked On Cardinals. So, yeah, I mean, the offense is going to be – it's just going to be fun. It's going to be fun to see what we're going to see. Yeah. I talked about Michael Wilson yesterday as being the storyline outside of the quarterback room for the preseason game on Friday, pending he's playing. I mean, I'm assuming he will, but, we'll find out. Hollywood Brown, going into the last year of his rookie scale deal, and his best friend / QB1 will not be playing for a chunk of the season. So when you look at Hollywood Brown specifically, what metrics are we going to be gauging pertaining to his future with the team? Say Clayton Tune starts a bunch of games. Say, Colt McCoy starts one, whatever it is. Or Colt McCoy starts the first 7. We have no idea what they're going to do. I'm in the camp. If you've been listening, I'm a Clayton Tune guy, must start week 1 until, he is just physically or mentally unable to catch up with the NFL game. I don't think that's going to be the case. He had a lot of reps at Houston, man. He was there for 6 years, I think. Like, I know colleges in the NFL, I get all that, but he's a seasoned guy. I think he can come in and play meaningful snaps for the Cardinals. But, without Kyler Murray, the quarterback room is 99.9% repeating going to be weaker unless Clayton Tune comes out and is the next great thing. How do you gauge Hollywood Brown's performance, production? And I think there's a couple metrics, like a couple ways you can watch games with Hollywood Brown as wide receiver 1 and really understand, okay, this guy needs to be an Arizona Cardinal for the future, or are those funds better allocated elsewhere to at the start of the 2024 offseason draft, and season altogether? One of them is availability. Okay, so say he plays 17 games. Check. And it's not just like that's what should happen. It's he can play a full season. And I know he missed time last year after 6 weeks. It was the last play of a game that was already out of reach, which sucks. And then towards the end of the year, it's just like, okay, the Cardinals are terrible. So, players didn't play even if they weren't necessarily hurt or whatever it may be. Availability is one. If he comes out and he's available, he's fresh, he's playing every game, that's a huge check mark. Because in the NFL, nothing's guaranteed. It's not like you can't fault a guy for, football it's impossible to me how people stay healthy for 17 weeks. Impossible to me. I can't understand it. But so it's a huge check mark if he's able to play, regardless of the win-loss record, the majority of the season. That's a check mark. 1. 2 is really how he maximizes his targets. This isn't really going to be like, oh, his separation's dropped. It hasn't. He's one of the fastest dudes in the league. He's got good route running capability. He can play outside like Steve Smith did. He can play inside. I'm curious to see where Drew Petzing lines him up if he does move him into the slot some, or if he's predominantly an outside guy with Michael Wilson. How he maximizes the targets he gets. So this is a before Kyler Murray and after Kyler Murray kind of thing. If he's only getting 4 targets a game, you can blame that on the quarterback play for the majority of the time because Hollywood Brown has shown his floor is higher than other wide receivers. It just is. Is he wide receiver 1? We don't know. Is he wide receiver 2? Most likely. But the Cardinals need a wide receiver 1. So that's why this determination on who he is can start in week 1, even though Kyler Murray's not playing. It's just got to be graded on a curve. So what he does with the targets he gets thrown. Okay. And then finally, like, I didn't want to call them incredible plays because that sounds dumb. But what I'll go back to an old faithful, the oh my God moments. Like I talked to them about Kyler Murray predominantly. I talked to them about Isaiah Simmons a bit where they're like, oh, what did I just see from said player? What did I just see from him? Hollywood Brown's oh my God moments could be catching a screen pass and taking it to the house 75 yards by making a cornerback and a safety miss and outrunning linebackers. It could be a stiff arm on a perfectly angled, stiff arm by him against a bigger player, going up and getting a ball over 2 defenders. Like with wide receivers, it's so difficult to see the oh my God moments now because there's so many of them. But pertaining to Hollywood Brown specifically, seeing those infused with him playing a lot and him making the most out of the targets that he gets is really going to be a determining factor for me before Kyler Murray comes back on if they should give him an extension or not. And, some of that seems to be like, well, duh. But this is an interesting case because I talked a lot after they traded him about the possibility that he's going to want a contract extension before his rookie contract runs out because he shares an agent with A.J. Brown and Deebo Samuel and DK Metcalf. Now, he's not at the same level as those 3. He hasn't been in the position to be at the same level as those 3 with quarterback play and not quarterback play, the offensive scheme that Baltimore had. For 6 weeks, he was a wide receiver 1 last year before he got hurt. It sucks that we didn't see him and DeAndre Hopkins on the field with Kyler Murray. But he could be a wide receiver 2. Which could benefit the Cardinals because they're not going to have to give him wide receiver 1 money, or they'll have an out to be like, hey, Kyler, I know he's your best friend, but we're not going to give him $20 million if he's a wide receiver 2. We're just not going to do it. So it's going to be very interesting to see those 3 things that I mentioned, plus how Rondale Moore, Greg Dortch, and Michael Wilson pull their weight. Like if Hollywood Brown doesn't have to be 120 reception guy for the Cardinals offense to hum from the wide receiver position, great. It benefits Hollywood Brown. It benefits the Cardinals in the financial department potentially. But all in all, what we're going to see from Hollywood Brown is kind of coupled with what we're going to see from Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray is going to be out for 6 weeks or 8 weeks for whatever it is. And when he comes back, the metrics are going to be interesting to see how they gauge his importance to the future of this organization in a small sample size, which most likely will be with a win-loss record that's not positive in the favor of the Cardinals. It's going to be this weird culmination of, is Kyler Murray the guy? You can't look at win-loss. You have to look at the actual play-by-play and see if he's going to be the guy. It's the same thing with Hollywood Brown. And it's going to be fascinating to witness. Fascinating. The Cardinals play football on Friday. There's another story that I kind of want to discuss, and it's kind of a gut punch, but it's also something that could bear fruits for the future in a way that only the NFL can provide. Alex Clancy, Locked On Cardinals. I'll hit that next as we finish up a Wednesday edition here of Locked On Cardinals, your team every day. Final segment, Locked On Cardinals. Alex Clancy here. Follow me on Twitter at Clancy's Corner. Please go subscribe to the YouTube channel. Turn notifications on. Like, subscribe. As I already said, subscribe. I already said that. You can get it free wherever you get your podcast as well if you want to do the auditory version of it instead of seeing my big dumb face on camera. Cardinals play on Friday against the Broncos. Should be fun. Okay, I talked about the 2 biggest storylines yesterday that I want to see, Clayton Tune and Michael Wilson. Because you could see Tune to Wilson, touchdown. Like that, it would be incredible to witness the first couple weeks, especially if Michael Wilson is a bona fide NFL wide receiver fringe star right out of the gate or somewhere close to that. Because we haven't really seen that from wide receivers drafted by the Cardinals, whether it be injury, lack of scheme preparation by the former head coach, where he didn't know that Rondale Moore could, go in front of the line of scrimmage to catch a pass until the middle of, his rookie year, and then forgot it, and then had to be reminded last season. The Cardinals haven't drafted. Like, look at the draft pick Steve Keim made in the wide receiver position over his tenure here. Ain't pretty. I mean, Hakeem Butler, Andy Isabella, Chad Williams. So, that old chestnut. But yeah, so, when the Cardinals play on Friday, those are my two biggest storylines. But I talked about this yesterday, and I want to talk about it again briefly. The defensive line and the cornerback room are going to be severe weaknesses for the Cardinals in 2023, as related to the rest of the roster. It's all graded on a curve, but there's not much wiggle room, especially if Marco Wilson gets injured or Antonio Hamilton does, which obviously you never wish anybody to get injured, let alone the team that you cover or are a fan of. But what that does is it breeds opportunity. And that's going to be fun for the Cardinals. I mean, Leki Fotu could really substantiate himself as a nose tackle for the future. LJ Collier, Jonathan Ledbetter, these guys are going to get massive amounts of run. And sometimes there are stars behind other stars that don't get the opportunity to perform until they go somewhere else. And what the Cardinals have in front of them is a true clean slate, tabula rasa, we're starting from scratch here, boys, kind of situation. And that allows for so many meaningful snaps. And every snap in the NFL during a regular season is a meaningful snap. So when I say meaningful snaps, for young guys that really haven't gotten a chance, they're going to get the opportunity to perform. And the biggest goal for the Cardinals in 2023, outside of the culture shift, building a strong foundation, Jonathan Gannon taking over as the head coach, is finding players with star potential to save on high draft capital in 2024. That's it. And they've got the opportunity with how Monty Osborne drafted Paris Johnson Jr., B.J. Ojulari, Garrett Williams, Michael Wilson. They've got the opportunity, Clayton too, to just check boxes to where they can check other boxes in 2024, whether it be through free agency or through the draft. So with these guys that nobody really knows, LJ Collier, Jonathan Ledbetter, Antonio Hamilton is not a household name. Like, if these guys can take these meaningful snaps and spin them into positive, meaningful snaps for the Cardinals on a production basis, that is what needs to happen in order for the Cardinals to expedite the growing and rebuilding process. And when I said only the NFL can provide, there are so many players that get drafted. There are so many things that need to happen in order for a player to get meaningful snaps under his belt. And these guys have the opportunity. So that's could be, sugarcoating an unsugarcoatable situation. I don't think it is, though. We're going to find stars on this defense that we don't know exist yet. Whether it be lack of snaps in the NFL, rookies, or guys who have been journeymen who have just been buried on depth charts who haven't, really amounted to much when they've gotten the opportunity. I mean, Victor Dimukeje last year had flashes hitting the quarterback. He was a preseason darling getting a couple sacks. I mean, the Cardinals have guys. They don't have stars, but they have guys. And guys need reps to become stars. Is it going to happen? Have no idea. But the opportunity there is the thing that's going to be fun about this season. You're going to get to see a lot of guys get a lot of opportunities, and they're going to either sink or swim, and they'll be with the Cardinals or they won't next year because of it. And that is why football is so amazing. Alex Clancy, Locked On Cardinals. I'll talk to you tomorrow.